The 1896 naval expansion plan was formulated following the First Sino-Japanese War and called for the addition of 4 armored cruisers alongside 4 battleships. Since Japan lacked the capacity to build these vessels, all had to be commissioned from British shipyards. After reviewing the Russian naval construction program, the Imperial Japanese Navy realized that the battleships planned under the initial proposal would be insufficient to match the Imperial Russian Navy. Financial constraints made ordering more battleships impractical, so the IJN opted to increase the number of armored cruisers from 4 to 6. This revised strategy became known as the 6-6 Fleet. Unlike many of their counterparts, which were designed for commerce raiding or protecting colonies and trade routes, Tokiwa and her sister ships were intended as fleet scouts and to serve within the battle line. The ship measured 134.72 meters or 442 feet in length overall and 124.36 meters between perpendiculars. Its beam was 20.48 meters, with an average draft of 7.4 meters. Tokiwa had a displacement of 9,667 metric tons at normal load and 10,476 metric tons at deep load. The ship's metacentric height was 0.88 meters, and it had a crew of 676 officers and enlisted personnel. Tokiwa was powered by 2 4-cylinder triple-expansion steam engines, each driving a single propeller shaft. 12 cylindrical boilers supplied steam to the engines, which had a total output of 18,000 indicated horsepower. The ship's design speed was 22 knots, though she reached 23.1 knots during sea trials, producing 19,040 indicated horsepower. Tokiwa could carry up to 1,390 long tons of coal and had a range of 10,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. The primary armament for all 6-6 Fleet armored cruisers consisted of 4 8-inch guns mounted in twin gun turrets positioned fore and aft of the superstructure. The secondary armament included 14 Elswick Ordnance Company Pattern Z quick-firing 6-inch guns. Of these, only 4 were not installed in armored casemates on the main and upper decks, with the guns on the upper deck protected by gun shields. Tokiwa also carried 12 quick-firing 12-pounder, 12 CWT guns, and 8 quick-firing 2.5-pounder Yamauchi guns for close-range defense against torpedo boats. Additionally, the ship was fitted with 5 457mm or 18-inch torpedo tubes, including 1 above water in the bow, and 4 submerged tubes, 2 on each broadside. All of the 6-6 Fleet armored cruisers shared the same armor scheme with slight variations, the most notable being that the 2 Asama-class ships used less durable Harvey armor. The waterline belt extended the full length of the ship, with thickness ranging from 178mm at the middle to 89mm at the bow and stern. It was 2.13 meters high, of which 1.52 meters was typically below the waterline. The upper section of the belt armor, 127mm or 5.0 inches thick, stretched from the top of the waterline belt to the main deck, covering 65.42 meters between the forward and rear barbettes. The Asama-class featured sloped 127mm armored bulkheads that sealed the ends of the central armored citadel. The barbettes, gun turrets, and the front of the casemates were all protected by 152mm or 6 inches of armor, while the sides and rear of the casemates had 51mm or 2 inches of armor. The deck was also armored with 51mm of protection, and the conning tower had 356mm or 14 inches of armor. The contract for Tokiwa was signed with Armstrong Whitworth on the 6th of July 1897. The ship had already been laid down at their Elswick shipyard on the 6th of January 1897 as a speculative project. She was launched on the 6th of July 1898 and completed on the 18th of May 1899. Tokiwa departed for Japan the following day, arriving in Yokosuka on July 16th. Captain Dewa Shigeto, appointed on April 5th to oversee her construction and delivery, was replaced by Captain Nakayama Nagaki upon her arrival. The next year, Tokiwa supported Japanese forces during the Boxer Rebellion in China. Sub-Lieutenant Kichisaburo Nomura, who would later serve as foreign minister, was assigned to Tokiwa in July 1903 and remained aboard until the ship's return after the battle off Ulsan in August 1904. Captain Shigetaro Yoshimatsu took command of Tokiwa on January 18, 1904. At the outbreak of the Russo-Japanese War a few weeks later, Tokiwa was assigned to the 2nd Division of the 2nd Fleet. She took part in the Battle of Port Arthur on February 9, 1904, when Vice Admiral Togo Heihachiro led the combined fleet in an attack on the Russian Pacific Squadron anchored near Port Arthur. Togo had expected the previous night's destroyer assault to leave the Russians disorganized, but they recovered quickly. The Japanese ships were spotted by the cruiser Boyarin, which was on patrol, and alerted the Russian forces. Togo then chose to target Russian coastal defenses with his main guns while engaging the fleet with secondary armament. However, splitting his fire proved ineffective, as the Japanese 8- and 6-inch guns caused minimal damage to the Russian ships, which focused their fire on the Japanese with some success. Although both sides suffered hits, Russian casualties were about 150, while Japanese losses were roughly 90 killed and wounded before Togo withdrew. In early March, Tokiwa was reassigned from the 2nd Division to Rear Admiral Dewa's 3rd Division. On the 10th of March, Tokiwa, along with the protected cruiser Chitose, attempted to capture the disabled Russian destroyer Staragushchi, but was forced to retreat under heavy fire from shore defenses. However, they managed to rescue the wounded crew. On April 13th, Togo successfully lured part of the Russian Pacific Squadron out, including Vice Admiral Stepan Makarov's flagship, the battleship Petropavlovsk. During the engagement, Tokiwa fired on Russian cruisers ahead of the battleships before retreating to join Togo's battleships. When Makarov saw the 5 Japanese battleships, he turned back toward Port Arthur, but his flagship struck a Japanese minefield. The Petropavlovsk sank in less than 2 minutes after a magazine explosion, killing Makarov and 676 others. In addition to this, the battleship Pobeda was also damaged by a mine. Tokiwa rejoined the 2nd Division a few days later, and Kamimura was ordered north in mid-April to guard the Sea of Japan and defend the Korea Strait against any attempt by Rear Admiral Carl Jessen's Vladivostok Independent Cruiser Squadron to break through and join the Pacific Squadron. On April 24th, the two forces narrowly missed each other in thick fog, and the Japanese proceeded to Vladivostok, where they laid several minefields before returning to Wonsan on April 30th. The division failed to intercept the Russian squadron on June 15th as it attacked several transports south of Okinoshima Island, hampered by heavy rain and fog. The Russians sortied again on June 30th, and Kamimura finally intercepted them the following day near Okinoshima. As night fell, the Russians managed to escape under the cover of darkness. On July the 17th, Jessen's squadron set out for Japan's eastern coast to divert Japanese forces away from the Sea of Japan and the Yellow Sea. They passed through Tsugaru Strait on July 19th, capturing ships bound for Japan. The Russian squadron's arrival off Tokyo Bay on July 24th prompted the Naval General Staff to order Kamimura to sail to Cape Toi Misaki, Kyushu, fearing Jessen might circumnavigate Japan to reach Port Arthur. 2 days later, Kamimura was ordered north to the Kii Channel and then to Tokyo Bay on July 28th. On July 30th, the General Staff redirected him to Tsushima Island, and later that day he learned Jessen's ships had passed through Tsugaru Strait that morning, returning to Vladivostok by August 1st. On August 10th, the Russian fleet at Port Arthur attempted to break through to Vladivostok but was forced to retreat after the Battle of the Yellow Sea. Jessen was ordered to meet them, but the order was delayed. His 3 armored cruisers, Rosia, Gromoboy, and Rurik, needed to raise steam, so he did not set sail until the evening of August 13th. By dawn, he had reached Tsushima, but turned back after failing to spot any ships from the Port Arthur squadron. About 36 miles north of the island, he encountered Kamimura's squadron, consisting of 4 modern armored cruisers, Iwate, Izumo, Azuma, and Tokiwa. The 2 squadrons had passed each other during the night unnoticed and both reversed course at dawn. This maneuver placed the Japanese ships directly in the Russians' path to Vladivostok. At 0500 hours, Jessen spotted the Japanese ships and ordered his squadron to turn northeast, with the Japanese following on a slightly converging course. Both sides opened fire around 0523 at a range of 8,500 meters. The Japanese concentrated their fire on Rurik, the trailing ship of the Russian formation. Rurik was quickly hit and began to fall behind the other 2 ships. Jessen then turned southeast to increase the distance, but this maneuver blinded the Russian gunners with the rising sun and prevented their broadside guns from targeting the Japanese. Around 0600, Jessen made a 180-degree turn to starboard, aiming to head for the Korean coast and allow Rurik to rejoin. Kamimura followed at 0610 but turned to port, widening the distance between the squadrons. Azuma developed engine trouble, forcing the Japanese to slow down. Firing resumed at 0624, and Rurik was hit 3 times in the stern, flooding her steering compartment, which forced her to rely on her engines for steering. Her speed continued to drop, exposing her further to Japanese fire, and by 0640 her steering had jammed to port. Jessen made another 180 turn to position his 2 ships between the Japanese and Rurik, but Rurik unexpectedly turned to starboard, increased speed, and passed between Jessen's ships and the Japanese. Kamimura also executed a 180-degree turn, aligning both squadrons on parallel southeast courses, but Jessen quickly made another 180-degree turn, putting the fleets on opposite courses. The Russians reversed course for a 3rd time around 0745 in a renewed effort to support Rurik, despite Rosia being on fire, though the flames were extinguished about 20 minutes later. By 0800, Kamimura circled Rurik to the south, allowing the other 2 Russian ships to his north, giving them an uncontested path to Vladivostok. Despite this, Jessen turned back again at 0815, instructing Rurik to make her way back to Vladivostok while he turned north at maximum speed, around 18 knots. Around this time, Kamimura's 2 older protected cruisers, Naniwa and Takachiho, were approaching from the south. Their arrival allowed Kamimura to pursue Jessen with all his armored cruisers, leaving the 2 new arrivals to handle Rurik. A running battle ensued between the Japanese and Russians for the next hour and a half, with the Japanese scoring enough hits to reduce the Russian speed to 15 knots. Azuma's engines failed again during the chase, prompting Tokiwa to take her place in the line. The Japanese closed to a range of about 5,000 meters before Kamimura increased the distance to 6,500 meters. Around 1000 hours, Kamimura's gunnery officer mistakenly informed him that Izumo had used up 3/4 of her ammunition, prompting him to turn back after a 5-minute rapid-fire barrage. Kamimura didn't want to leave the Tsushima Strait unprotected and planned to conserve ammunition for Rurik, unaware that she had already been sunk by Naniwa and Takachiho. Although they had radioed Kamimura, the message wasn't received. Shortly after the Japanese turned back, Gromoboy and Rosia were forced to stop for repairs. None of the Japanese ships were seriously damaged, with Tokiwa suffering only 3 wounded. After the battle, Tokiwa was transferred to Rear Admiral Uryu Sotokichi's command and participated in the blockade of Shanghai on August 20th, where the Russian cruiser Askold and a destroyer had sought refuge after the Battle of the Yellow Sea. Tokiwa returned home on 8th September after the Chinese government formally interned the Russian ships. In mid-September, Tokiwa and Iwate were reassigned to the 1st Division. In November, Tokiwa was sent to the Kure Naval Arsenal for a refit. After the refit, the ship was transferred back to the 2nd Division, which was ordered north to Wonsan on February 2nd to escort the occupation force stationed there. Tokiwa returned home for another refit on February 12th. On April 13th, the 2nd Division, including the armored cruisers Izumo and Kasuga, set out to escort mine layers as they deployed 715 mines off Vladivostok. On May 27th, as the Russian 2nd and 3rd Pacific Squadrons approached Japan after their long journey from the Baltic Sea, they were spotted early that morning by Japanese patrol ships. However, visibility was poor, and radio communication was unreliable. The initial reports prompted Togo to send his fleet to sea. The 2nd Division sighted the Russian fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvensky, around 11:30. Kamimura closed to within 8,000 meters, but withdrew under fire to join Togo's battleships. Tokiwa, third in a line of 6 ships, was part of the action when Togo opened fire on the 2nd Pacific Squadron at 14:10. Like most ships in her division, she targeted the battleship Osliabya, which was forced out of formation and sank at 14:50 about 20 minutes later. By then, the Russian formation was in disarray, and Knyaz Suvorov suddenly emerged from the mist at 15:35, only 2,000 meters away. All of Kamimura's ships engaged the Suvorov for about 5 minutes, with Azuma and the armored cruiser Yakumo also firing torpedoes at the Russian vessel, though without success. After 17:30, Kamimura led his division in a futile chase of several Russian cruisers, leaving Togo's battleships to continue without support. He called off the pursuit around 18:03 and turned north to rejoin Togo. By 18:30, his ships had spotted the rear of the Russian battle line and opened fire as the range closed to around 8,000 to 9,000 meters. The impact on the Russians is unknown, but firing ceased by 19:30, and Kamimura's ships rejoined Togo at 20:08 as night fell. The next morning, the remaining Russian ships were spotted, and the Japanese opened fire around 10:30, staying beyond the effective range of the Russian guns. Rear Admiral Nikolai Nebogatov decided to surrender as his ships were unable to return fire or close the distance. During the battle, Tokiwa was hit by 1 large and 7 smaller shells, mostly 75mm rounds, which caused minor damage but killed 1 crewman and wounded 14 others. Captain Imai Kanamasa took command of Tokiwa on June 14th as Togo reorganized the fleet for upcoming operations. In early July, as the Imperial Japanese Navy prepared to invade Sakhalin Island, Kamimura's 2nd Division, now reduced to Iwate, Izumo, and Tokiwa, was tasked with defending the Korea Strait before escorting troops for an amphibious landing in northeastern Korea. In mid-August, the division supported the landing at Chongjin, closer to the Russian border. In 1910, Tokiwa's boilers were replaced with Miyabara water tube boilers, and her 6-inch guns were upgraded with Japanese-built models. In December 1911, both Iwate and Tokiwa were deployed to Port Arthur to maintain order during the Chinese Revolution. Tokiwa took part in the initial stages of the Battle of Tsingtao before returning to Sasebo on October 2, 1914. In the following month, she was deployed to Singapore in preparation for a mission to search for the German commerce raider Emden, but the German ship was sunk before the operation began. On September 1, 1916, Tokiwa was assigned to the training squadron, and on April 5, 1917, she departed with Yakumo on a training cruise to ports in California, Hawaii, and the South Sea Islands, carrying cadets from the 44th class of the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy. After returning on August 17th, she was relieved of her training duties on August 25th and sent to Honolulu, Hawaii in October to protect shipping from German commerce raiders, allowing the U.S. Navy to redeploy its forces to the Atlantic. On the 10th of August 1918, Tokiwa was reassigned to the training squadron and returned home to prepare for her next training cruise. Along with Azuma, she departed on March 1, 1919 for a cruise to South Asia and Australia, and again on November 24, 1919, also with Azuma, for a voyage to Singapore, Southeast Asia, the Suez Canal, and the Mediterranean Sea. After returning on May 20, 1920, Tokiwa was relieved of her training duties on 4 June. She was reclassified as a first-class coast defense ship on September 30, 1921. On 30 September 1922, Tokiwa began her conversion into a mine layer at the Sasebo Naval Arsenal. To accommodate 200 to 300 mines, her rear 8-inch gun turret and the 6 6-inch guns on the main deck were removed. Additionally, her light armament was reduced to 2 12-pounder guns, though 2 8-cm 43rd year type anti-aircraft guns were installed. The conversion was completed in March 1924. On the 1st of August 1927, Tokiwa's stern was heavily damaged by an accidental explosion in Seiki Bay while disarming fused mines. One mine detonated, triggering others, resulting in the deaths of 35 crewmen and injuries to 65. After repairs, Tokiwa was placed in the reserve fleet. Tokiwa was assigned to the First Fleet from January 1932 to May 1933, following the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931, patrolling the waters off northern China. From November 1937 to 1938, she was refitted with 8 Kampon boilers, reducing her maximum speed to 16 knots, and her remaining torpedo tubes were removed, allowing space for up to 500 mines. With the creation of the 4th Fleet on 15 November 1939, Tokiwa was assigned to the 18th Division, and a year later to the 19th Division under Rear Admiral Kiyohide Shima, along with the mine layer Okinoshima. In 1940, she was converted into a training mine layer, reducing her mine capacity to around 200 to 300 mines. As part of this refit, her forward 8-inch gun turret, 4 amidships 6-inch guns, and 1 8-cm 43rd year type anti-aircraft gun were removed. Her anti-aircraft armament was significantly upgraded with the addition of 2 single 40mm guns and 20 25mm Type 96 light anti-aircraft guns in twin mounts. On the 9th and 10th of December 1941, Tokiwa, along with other mine layers of the 19th Division, escorted 2 troop transports carrying occupation forces to Makin and Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands. In January 1942, she participated in Operation R, the invasion of Rabaul and Kavieng, before returning to Kwajalein Atoll. On February 1, 1942, Tokiwa was damaged during an air raid by American aircraft from the carrier USS Enterprise and was forced to return to Sasebo for repairs. She arrived back at Truk on July 14th and, on August 19th, was assigned to the Japanese task force sent to reoccupy Makin Atoll after the Makin raid. On May 1, 1943, Tokiwa was reassigned to the Ominato Guard District and departed Truk on the 26th of May in a convoy bound for Yokosuka, which was unsuccessfully attacked by USS Salmon on June 3rd. On January 20, 1944, she was transferred to the 18th Escort Squadron of the 7th Fleet. In June 1944, Tokiwa laid thousands of mines in the waters off Okinawa, and in February 1945, she did the same off Yakushima. Ironically, Tokiwa struck a mine on April 14, 1945, about 78 miles off Hisaki, Kyushu, sustaining moderate damage. She was further damaged by mines laid by U.S. Army Air Force B-29 Superfortress bombers on June 3, 1945. During the war, her armament was reinforced with approximately 10 25mm Type 96 anti-aircraft guns in single mounts and 80 depth charges. Additionally, she was equipped with Type 3, Mark I, Model 3, and Type 2, Mark II, Model 1 air search radars. While stationed at Ominato in Mutsu Bay, northern Japan, Tokiwa was severely damaged on August 9, 1945, by a direct bomb hit and 4 near misses during an air attack by United States Navy aircraft from Task Force 38. Her crew was forced to beach the ship. On November 30, 1945, Tokiwa was officially removed from the Navy list. After World War II, the wreck was refloated on April 5, 1947, towed to Hakodate, Hokkaido, and scrapped between August and October 1947.